Get these two off my docket. This is a courtroom, not a summer camp. Terrence Bellamy stood without flinching. 18 years old. A deep burgundy button-down pressed stiff. His hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for a bus. Not a verdict. We're here on behalf of our grandmother. Sir. Marcus Whitfield turned toward him slowly. The way a man turns to look at a stain he just noticed on a hotel carpet. On behalf of... Son. You can barely dress yourselves for a courtroom, let alone represent anybody in one. Laughter rolled through the gallery. Even the bailiff smirked and looked away. Simone Bellamy bent down and gathered the papers. Whitfield had swept off the table with the back of his hand. Not bothering to apologize. Terrence didn't move. Didn't blink. Their grandmother watched all of it from a wheelchair near the rail. Silent. Her paralyzed left hand resting in her lap, exactly where it always rested. Nobody in that room knew it yet. But the papers scattered across the floor held a single question that would end Marcus Whitfield's career before the lunch recess. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, that courtroom went dead silent after what happened next. Let's get into it. Ashford Mills, Ohio. A small town where everybody knows your name. And for some people, knowing your name has never been enough. Fenwick Hollow sits at the edge of town. 3 7/10 acres of dark river-bottom soil. Hickory trees older than the county itself. And a slate-blue farmhouse with a porch swing that hasn't stopped creaking in 55 years. Odessa Bellamy and her husband bought that land outright in 1957. Back when a black family buying acreage in Ashford Mills meant closing the sale in a back office because the front counter wouldn't process the paperwork. Her husband worked 2 jobs and drove a delivery route on weekends to make every payment. He never missed one. 3 generations came up on that porch. Odessa raised her daughter there. Her daughter raised twins there. And when a highway accident took the twins' parents 11 years ago, Odessa took in Terrence and Simone. 2. She was 61 then. Already worn thin. Already grieving her own child. She raised them anyway. Odessa taught 3rd grade in Ashford Mills for 31 years. Nearly every black child in that town sat in her classroom at some point. She taught them to read before anyone else believed they could. She taught them to raise their hands and speak clearly. Every one of them called her Miss Odessa in the winter of 2018. A stroke took full use of her left hand permanent. The doctors said, no coming back. She learned to write right-handed at 62 years old. Her new signature was slow, jagged, tilted the wrong way. Nothing like the smooth hand she'd used her whole life. But she still made breakfast for Terrence and Simone every morning. Still sat on that porch swing at dusk. Still repeated what their grandfather used to say, this land is paid in full. This land is ours. Don't you ever let a stranger take it with a signature. Terrence was the quiet one, the kind of quiet that unsettles people because they can't read what's underneath it. He started reading property law at the Ashford Mills branch library when he was 13. Not for a grade. Not for anybody. But because he'd watched a landlord threaten an elderly neighbor with an eviction notice, and nobody in the house could tell him whether it was even legal. So he decided he'd find out himself. By 18, he'd worked through more of the state's real estate statutes than most first-year law students. He kept notes in a worn canvas-covered notebook his grandmother gave him for his 15th birthday, page after page of case citations. Definitions. Questions he hadn't answered yet. Simone was different. Sharp the way a fresh blade is sharp fast. Exact. Impossible to ignore once she got moving. She had a memory that held on to things the first time she saw them. While Terrence studied the law, Simone studied the paper trail. County filings. Notary registries. Online property databases. She could locate a record the county itself had forgotten existed. Together, the twins were something Ashford Mills never saw coming. But Ashford Mills wasn't paying attention to Terrence and Simone Bellamy. It was paying attention to Preston Adler. Adler owned Adler Point Developments, the largest land developer in the county. He had plans for Fenwick Hollow, big plans. High-end lakefront lots. A private clubhouse. A gated entrance with a 2-year waiting list. There was only one obstacle. Black families still lived on Fenwick Hollow. 5 of them. One by one. They disappeared. Some sold cheap after months of pressure. Some got buried under legal fees they couldn't cover. Some simply gave up and left. Marcus Whitfield handled every one of those cases personally. Whitfield was Adler's attorney, 56 years old. 28 years in real estate litigation. Undefeated in a property dispute for over a decade. His office sat above a bank on 4th Street. Glass door. Brushed brass lettering. The kind of place that told you exactly how much the man inside charged per hour. 5 families gone. 5 lots cleared. Odessa Bellamy was the last one standing. On a Thursday afternoon in late summer, a certified letter arrived at the farmhouse on Fenwick Hollow. Adler Point Developments was suing Odessa Bellamy for possession of her land. The complaint claimed she had signed a deed transfer in August of 2023, conveying the property to Adler's company. Odessa held the letter in her right hand. Her left hand sat motionless on the armrest of her chair. "I never signed a thing," she said. "I would never." Terrence stood in the kitchen doorway watching his grandmother's hands shake around that paper. He watched her eyes fill. Right there. In that doorway, he made a decision that was going to put him face to face with the most feared lawyer in Ashford County. If you think this story ends with an old woman losing her home, keep watching, because what these 2 teenagers did next is going to change how you look at the word justice. Terrence started dialing the next morning. 7 law offices in Ashford County. The first one picked up on the second ring. A receptionist with a rehearsed, apologetic tone. "I'm sorry. We have a conflict with that matter. We're not able to assist." A conflict meaning Adler Point Developments was already their client. The second office gave the same answer in different words. "We can't take on a new case involving that particular property dispute right now." The third office didn't even bother pretending. "Kid, Marcus Whitfield is on the other side of that. Find somebody else." 3 calls. 3 closed doors. Terrence kept going. Offices 4 and 5 quoted retainers. The cheapest was $9,500. One wanted $14,000 just to review the file. Terrence looked at the bank statement, magneted to the refrigerator. His grandmother's entire savings, $640.28. That's what 31 years teaching 3rd grade gets a black woman with a pension and a mortgage that took 4 decades to pay down to nothing. Offices 6 and 7 never answered. Terrence left messages. Nobody called back. Simone tried a different door. She found a legal aid clinic online. Free representation for people who couldn't pay. She filled out the intake application that same night. Every field. Every attachment. The reply came 3 days later, 1 paragraph. "Thank you for your submission. Given our current caseload, the estimated wait for new property matters is approximately 5 months. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. 5 months. 2 weeks. The math didn't work. It was never built to work, not for people like Odessa Bellamy." Meanwhile, Whitfield moved fast. 2 days after the filing, a white pickup pulled into the gravel drive at Fenwick Hollow. 2 men climbed out. Polo shirts. Clipboards. Walking the property like they already owned every inch of it. Measuring tape along the tree line. Photographs of the house. The porch. The hickories. Simone stepped out onto the steps. "Can I help you with something?" One of them didn't even look up. "Survey. Ordered by the new ownership." "There is no new ownership," Simone said. He finally turned and looked at her the way you look at a child interrupting a business call. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Take it up with the court." They spent 40 minutes on Odessa's land. Measuring, writing, photographing, and when they left, they didn't shut the gate behind them. Odessa watched from the front window without a word. That night, her blood pressure spiked so high that Terrence drove her to Ashford Mills Regional at 11 at night. The doctors kept her overnight for observation stress-related hypertension. They called it. Terrence sat in that waiting room until nearly 3 in the morning. the fluorescent lights humming, the smell of burnt coffee and antiseptic everywhere. His grandmother was 74 years old, lying in a hospital bed because two strangers had walked her land like it already belonged to somebody else. Across town, Marcus Whitfield was sleeping just fine. Herman Tate showed up at the hospital the next afternoon, 69 years old. Lived 2 houses down from Odessa for close to 40 years. He brought a covered dish of stew and a look on his face that said he'd seen this exact thing before. They did the same thing to my sister-in-law out on Mill Race Road, Herman said, easing himself into a chair. Knees popping, papers she never signed. By the time she found anybody to help her, the excavators were already parked on her lawn. He looked from Terrence to Simone. Your grandmother's the last one out there. You understand that they get her land. Fenwick Hollow is finished. Terrence didn't answer. He sat there turning the canvas notebook over and over in his hands. That night, Simone sat alone in the hospital parking lot. Engine off. Windows up. And for the first time since the letter arrived, she cried. Not loud, just quiet tears in a dark car at 11 at night. Because she was 18 years old. Because her grandmother was upstairs in a hospital bed. Because a man with a brass nameplate and a decade-long winning streak was about to take the only home she'd ever known. And because not one person in the entire county was willing to help, Terrence found her there 20 minutes later. He opened the passenger door, sat down, and put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say it would be okay. He didn't say they'd figure it out. He just sat there in the quiet with her. Eventually Simone wiped her face and asked, What are we going to do? Terrence opened the notebook to a page near the back. Small, careful handwriting. I've been reading through the complaint again, he said. The deed transfer. It's dated August of last year. The signature, Grandma's signature, it's smooth. Even. Left-handed. Simone looked at him. Grandma hasn't used her left hand since 2018. 3 years before that deed. Terrence said. The parking lot went silent, except for a street lamp buzzing overhead. Simone's expression changed that fast. Sharp click Terrence knew well. Like a lens snapping into focus. They forged it. She whispered. They forged it. Terrence said. And for the first time in 2 weeks, something other than fear crossed both their faces. It wasn't relief. It wasn't confidence. It was smaller. Quieter than that. It was a reason to keep going. I tell this part because I've watched grown men with law degrees do less with a lot more than these 2 kids did in a parking lot at midnight. 18 years old. No money. No backup. And they still chose to fight. That's not courage anybody taught them. That's courage they were born carrying. The next morning, Terrence sat at the kitchen table before sunrise. The canvas notebook open in front of him. The first page still had his grandmother's old handwriting. From back when her left hand still worked tall. Steady letters. The law is a shield. Not a sword. But you have to know how to hold it. She'd written that for him on his 15th birthday. 3 years earlier. He'd read it 100 times. That morning, in the grey light before dawn. It meant something different. It meant nobody was coming to save them. Simone came downstairs at 6 and found him still in yesterday's clothes. The notebook buried under printouts from the county recorder's website. How long have you been up? I never went to bed. She sat across from him. Looked at the papers. Looked at his face. We're doing this ourselves. Terrence said. It wasn't a question. We're 18. Simone said. Ohio doesn't require an attorney in civil matters. If Grandma signs power of attorney, we can represent her. I looked it up last night. Terrence closed the notebook. Then we need her signature. They brought the paperwork to Odessa that afternoon. She was home from the hospital. Back in her chair on the porch. The little oxygen unit humming beside her. Terrence explained everything, the forged signature. The left-hand problem. What they wanted to do. Odessa listened without a single interruption. When he finished, she studied both of them for a long moment. The porch swing creaked in the breeze. A wren sang from the hickory closest to the house. "You want me to send my 18-year-old grandbabies into a courtroom against Marcus Whitfield?" "Yes, ma'am. The man hasn't lost a property case in over 10 years. "Yes, ma'am." She reached out with her right hand and took the pen. Her fingers shook, but her eyes didn't. She signed in jagged, tilted letters, nothing like the smooth left-handed signature on that forged deed. "Your grandfather bought this land with hands that hauled crates until they bled," she said. "Don't you let them take it with a pen." The next 16 days were the longest of their lives. Terrence practically moved into the Ashford Mills library. 8 in the morning, until closing every night. Same table by the window, surrounded by reference volumes he couldn't check out. Property statutes, conveyance law, fraude provision. He read every section. Then the case law under each section. Then the case law cited inside that case law. He filled the canvas notebook. Then bought a second one from the dollar store down the block. And filled that too. The librarian, a woman in her 60s, named Joan, watched him for 3 days before she finally asked what he was working on. A property case. Terrence told her. She didn't ask anything further. But the next morning 2 more volumes of Ohio real estate law had appeared on his table. A sticky note on top that read, "These might help." It was the only small kindness he got from anyone outside his family that whole stretch. Simone worked from the old desktop in the living room, the one that took nearly 3 minutes to boot and crashed if you opened more than 4 browser tabs. She taught herself to navigate the county's records portal deed filings, notary registrations, transfer histories. She built a timeline across the living room wall out of sticky notes and colored marker. Dates on the left, names on the right, connections drawn in red. August 22, 2023, date on the forged deed. January 14, 2022, the day Roland Voss lost his notary commission. Winter 2018, the date of Odessa's stroke. The timeline told a simple story, a deed signed by a hand that couldn't sign, notarized by a man who legally couldn't notarize, filed by a lawyer who knew both of those facts before he ever mailed the letter. Every night the twins rehearsed. Terrence stood in front of the bathroom mirror, running his opening statement. The first time, his voice cracked on the second sentence. By the 5th run, his hands were still trembling. By the 10th, he got all the way through without stopping. Simone sat cross-legged in the hallway playing Marcus Whitfield. Objection. Your Honor, these children have no standing. Your Honor, we hold valid power of attorney. Standing is established under state statute. Louder. Simone told him. He's going to talk over you. Don't let him. They went back and forth until 2 in the morning. Night after night. For 16 straight nights. On the last night, Simone said something Terrence wrote down and underlined twice in the notebook. Don't try to out-argue him. Terrence. He's got 28 years of that. You will not win a shouting match with Marcus Whitfield. She looked at her brother. Ask the right question. One question. That's all you need. Terrence stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something on the very last page of the notebook. He didn't show Simone what it said. The morning of the hearing, the twins put on the best clothes they owned. Odessa was already on the porch when they came down, wheelchair parked at the top of the steps. A mug of coffee balanced in her right hand. Steam curling into the cool morning air. Fenwick Hollow was quiet. Fog threading through the hickories. Birds just starting up. The smell of river, soil and coffee, and something older underneath it all. Like the land itself breathing, Odessa looked at her grandchildren 18 years old. Orphaned at 7. Raised on a teacher's pension and a piece of dirt somebody had decided was worth more without them on it. She set the coffee down and reached for Terrence's hand. I spent 31 years teaching children in this town, she said. I taught every single one of them the same lesson. Stand up straight, speak clearly, and never let another soul convince you that you don't belong in the room. She squeezed his hand. You belong in that room. Terrence picked up 2 plastic dollar store folders off the porch rail, the covers already cracking at the spine. Every scrap of evidence they'd gathered in 16 sleepless days packed inside. He tucked the canvas notebook into his back pocket. And the Bellamy twins walked off Fenwick Hollow toward the Ashford County Courthouse, where Marcus Whitfield, 28 years undefeated, was already inside straightening his onyx cufflinks, expecting the easiest win of his career. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The night before the hearing, Terrence nearly missed it entirely. He was at the kitchen table at close to midnight, eyes aching, coffee gone cold, staring at the same scanned deed transfer he'd already gone over a dozen times. Odessa's name at the bottom. The date. August 22, 2023. The notary seal. Roland Voss. Nothing new. He was about to shut the laptop when something caught his eye, the signature itself. He'd looked at it 100 times. But this time, he wasn't reading the name. He was reading the angle. The slant. The pressure of the pen. Smooth. Even. Tilted left. The kind of stroke that comes from a steady, dominant left hand. He turned his head and looked at the power of attorney form sitting on the table beside him. The one his grandmother had signed 3 days earlier. Right hand. The letters jagged. Uneven. Tilted the opposite direction. The pen had skipped twice where her grip lost pressure. 2 signatures. Same name. 2 completely different hands. His grandmother hadn't used her left hand since 2018. The deed was dated 2023. His chest tightened. He pushed back from the table. Simone. Come here. She was on the couch, half asleep. Laptop balanced on her knees. She came into the kitchen and stood behind him. Terrence laid the 2 documents side by side and didn't say a word, just pointed. Simone looked. 5 seconds. 10. They forged it. She said. They actually forged it, but she was already moving. Pulling the laptop toward her. Opening the Ohio Secretary of State's notary registry. She typed in Roland Voss. Ashford County. The result loaded in seconds. Roland James Voss. Notary commission revoked. Effective date, January 14. 2023. Simone read it twice. Then a third time. Her hand shaking slightly against the trackpad. The deed claimed Voss had notarized Odessa's signature on August 22. 2023. But Voss hadn't held a valid commission since the start of 2022, 19 months before he supposedly stamped that seal. A forged signature. A dead notary license. The deed wasn't just fraudulent. It was 2 lies stacked on top of each other. Simone printed the page. The old printer in the corner groaned and spat out a single sheet. Terrence, she said quietly, this deed isn't just forged. It was notarized by a man who legally could not notarize anything. Terrence nodded. But he wasn't finished. He pulled up the county's electronic docket and scrolled through every filing attached to their case number until he found it, an amended deed submitted by Marcus Whitfield. Time-stamped 4:50 that morning. Less than 6 hours before the hearing. He opened it. The amendment adjusted the property boundary description. Small language. Nothing dramatic on its face, but the question was already screaming louder in Terrence's head than anything Whitfield had ever said in a courtroom. Why amend a deed on the very morning of a hearing, unless you already know the original can't survive being looked at closely? Whitfield knew. He already knew the deed had problems. And instead of withdrawing the case, he tried to patch the cracks 6 hours before a judge could see them. Terrence closed the laptop and looked at his sister. I know my one question. Simone tilted her head. What is it? He didn't answer. He pulled the canvas notebook from his back pocket, flipped to the final page, and wrote one more sentence beneath the line he'd written the night before. Then he closed it and slid it back into his pocket. You'll hear it when everyone else does. The Ashford County Courthouse smelled like floor polish and old radiator heat. Terrence noticed that first, then the fluorescent lights overhead. One of them flickering near the back wall. A ceiling fan turning slowly above the bench. doing absolutely nothing about the warmth. This wasn't a courtroom out of a movie. It was a small-town room where small-town disputes got settled: parking tickets, property lines, noise complaints. Today, it was going to decide whether a 74-year-old black woman kept the land her family had held for 66 years. Marcus Whitfield was already seated at the plaintiff's table, a charcoal suit, an Italian leather briefcase. 2 junior associates beside him in matching burgundy ties. Matching posture. Matching silence. 3 men who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalogue. Across the aisle, the defense table held 2 plastic dollar store folders and a worn canvas notebook. Terrence and Simone sat down. Behind them, Odessa's wheelchair clicked into place. She folded her right hand over her left and said nothing. The gallery was mostly empty. Herman Tate sat in the second row, still in his work boots. 2 neighbours from Fenwick Hollow. And in the back corner, a woman Terrence had never seen before, mid-50s. Charcoal blazer. Watching everything with the kind of stillness that doesn't blink. Nobody knew who she was yet. The side door opened. All rise. The Honourable Judge Vivian Ostrander presiding. Ostrander walked in, 63 years old. Close-cropped white hair. Reading glasses on a chain. She sat, opened a folder, and scanned the courtroom the way a person does when they've spent 30 years in that chair and already know more than everyone else assumes. Be seated. Case number 2, 6CV0847. Adler Point Developments versus Odessa Bellamy. Mr. Whitfield. You may proceed. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, gave the judge a nod, like they were old acquaintances meeting for lunch. Thank you, Your Honour. This is a simple matter. My client, Adler Point Developments, holds a valid deed of transfer executed by the defendant in August of last year. The property, 3.7 acres at Fenwick Hollow, was lawfully conveyed. We're simply asking the court to enforce what has already been settled. He smiled. The smile of a man who'd run this place 60 times and never once heard the word no. I expect this to take no more than 15 minutes of the court's time. Ostrander glanced toward the defense table. Does the defendant have representation? Terrence stood. His chair scraped loudly against the tile. Your Honour, my name is Terrence Bellamy. This is my sister, Simone Bellamy. We are representing our grandmother, Odessa Bellamy, under her signed power of attorney. Marcus turned his head slowly. The way a cat turns toward something it finds mildly amusing. Your Honour. His voice carried an edge of contempt dressed up as courtesy. Are we actually proceeding with this? 2 teenagers. I have practiced law for 28 years. This is not a mock trial club. Someone in the gallery laughed behind a cough. Ostrander didn't smile. She looked at Terrence over her glasses. Mr. Bellamy, do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes. Your Honour, this is a civil action for possession filed under the State Property Code. The burden of proof rests with the plaintiff to establish a valid deed of conveyance. We intend to show that the deed in question is void. The room shifted, not a sound exactly. More a change in the air. Like weather turning. Ostrander's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Proceed. Marcus's smile didn't disappear, but it thinned considerably. He recovered fast and presented the deed. A clean copy projected on the screen. Odessa Bellamy. August 22. 2023. Notarized by Roland Voss. Recorded with the county recorder. The document speaks for itself. Your Honour. Signed. Notarized. Filed. I fail to see what there is to argue. Terrence stood again. Your Honour. May I examine the original? Marcus hesitated a beat, then handed it over. Terrence turned the page once, set it down, picked up his pen, and wrote a single line in his notebook. Is the young man finished examining our exhibit? Marcus leaned on the words, young man, like they tasted good in his mouth. Terrence didn't answer him. He looked at the judge instead. Your Honour, I'd like to enter Exhibit A, a certified medical record from Ashford Mills Regional, dated winter of 2018, confirming that Odessa Bellamy suffered a stroke, resulting in complete, permanent loss of function in her left hand. He let that sit for a moment. The signature on this deed was made by a left hand. My grandmother has not used her left hand since 2018. This deed is dated 2023. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Marcus Whitfield went very still. For the first time in the whole proceeding, his mouth stayed shut. Ostrander looked at Marcus. Her voice level but her eyes sharp. Mr. Whitfield, would you like to respond? That's, his voice caught for just a fraction of a second before steadying. That's a matter of handwriting interpretation. Your Honor. Not a medical fact, but something in his tone had shifted. Just barely. Just enough. In the back row, the woman in the charcoal blazer leaned forward. Marcus hadn't built a reputation over 28 years by panicking. He took 3 seconds, straightened his cuffs, and came back swinging. Your Honor, I object to this entire line of argument. A stroke does not automatically eliminate all hand function permanently. Many stroke patients regain partial use over time. Mrs. Bellamy may well have recovered limited function in her left hand by 2023. He turned toward Terrence without actually looking at him. These are children. Your Honor, no medical expert, no handwriting analyst, no qualified witness whatsoever. What they have is a hospital record and a theory. I could produce a record showing I had bronchitis last February. That doesn't mean I can't sign my own name today. I move to exclude the medical record entirely. Absent expert testimony establishing a direct link between the defendant's condition and her signing capacity, the room held its breath. Ostrander leaned back, studying the record. Then Terrence. Then Marcus. This was the moment. If she excluded the medical evidence, their strongest piece was gone. Everything they'd built across 16 sleepless nights could collapse in a single ruling. Terrence's stomach dropped, his fingers going cold around the pen. Ostrander opened her mouth and Simone stood up. Your Honor, may I address the notarization? Every head in the courtroom turned. It was the first time Simone had spoken. The first time anyone besides Terrence had said a word from the defense table. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He clearly hadn't planned for 2 of them. Ostrander paused, looked at Simone, and nodded once. You may. Simone's voice was quieter than her brother's, but it carried. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit B, a certified printout from the Ohio Secretary of State's Notary Public Registry. She held up the page the old printer had produced the night before. The deed, presented by Mr. Whitfield, was notarized by Roland James Voss. According to the state's own records, Mr. Voss's notary commission was revoked, effective January 14. Lianqianling Arshar. She let it land for a second. This deed is dated August 22, 2023, 19 months after Mr. Voss lost his legal authority to notarize any document at all. Under state statute, a document notarized by an individual whose commission has been revoked is void on its face. She set the printout down and folded her hands. This deed isn't merely questionable. Your Honor, it's legally invalid. The gallery stirred. Herman Tate leaned forward. The woman in the charcoal blazer hadn't moved a muscle, but her eyes had. Marcus was on his feet before Simone finished sitting. Objection. The notary's status has no bearing on overruled. Ostrander said flatly. Sit down. Mr. Whitfield. He sat, jaw tight. One of his associates slid a note across the table. He didn't read it. Ostrander took off her glasses, set them on the bench, glanced at the clock. This court will take a 20-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 11:30. The gavel came down sharp in the small room. Mr. Whitfield. I'd use that time wisely. Chairs scraped. Voices murmured. But Terrence's eyes stayed fixed on Marcus, who had his phone out before he'd even cleared the side door, dialing fast, turning the corner into the hallway. Terrence caught 3 words before the door swung shut. "We have a problem." Who was on the other end? Adler. Voss. Someone else. It didn't matter right now. Out in the hallway, Terrence leaned against the wall. And for the first time, Simone noticed his hands were shaking. "You okay?" He almost got the medical record thrown out. If Ostrander had sided with him, she didn't. Though, she could have. Simone put a hand on his arm. "We still have your question. The one you won't tell me. I know it." Terrence said. Behind them, the courtroom door opened and Odessa rolled out in her chair. She looked at her grandchildren, one shaking, one steady, both still on their feet, and reached out with her right hand, taking one of each of theirs. "I'm proud of you," she said. "No matter what happens in there." Across the courthouse, Marcus Whitfield paced a side hallway with his phone against his ear, sweating through his charcoal suit. Trying to fix something 2 18-year-olds with dollar store folders had just cracked wide open. When court resumed, Marcus looked different. Not broken. Not scared, just different. His jacket, buttoned before, hung open now. His tie had drifted a 1/4 inch off center. Small things. The kind only somebody watching closely would notice. Terrence was watching closely. He came out swinging with a new approach if you can't defend the document. Attack the people questioning it. "Your Honor, before we continue, I must put something on the record." Both hands flat on the table. The individuals representing the defendant hold no legal license. No bar, admission. No professional standing of any kind. They are 18 years old. He let the number hang there. What we've witnessed this morning isn't legal argument. It's amateur research from 2 teenagers who've mistaken internet searches for courtroom expertise. I'd ask the court to weigh their so-called evidence accordingly. He sat down, satisfied. The way a man sits when he thinks he's just reminded everyone who the adult in the room is. Ostrander studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Whitfield, the respondents hold valid power of attorney. They have standing. The evidence they've presented comes from certified state records and accredited medical documentation, not, as you suggest, from an internet search." She paused. "Continue." Marcus's jaw tightened. His associate stopped writing. Ostrander turned to the defense table. "Mr. Bellamy. Anything further?" Terrence stood slowly. The room had gone quiet. The ceiling fan turning. The fluorescent light in back still flickering. "Your Honor, I have one question for Mr. Whitfield." Ostrander nodded. "Go ahead." Terrence stepped around the table. He didn't move toward Marcus. He didn't need to. He stood exactly where he was. In his pressed burgundy shirt. Dollar store folder still on the table behind him. In a room that had laughed at him 2 hours earlier. He looked straight at Marcus Whitfield. "Mr. Whitfield." Marcus looked up, his expression saying, "Go ahead. Kid. Ask your little question. If this deed is authentic, if it's valid and legally binding, exactly as you've told this court, then why did you file an amended version of it at 4:50 this morning? Less than 6 hours before this hearing began. Silence. Not quiet. Silence with weight to it. Pressing against your ears. The ceiling fan kept turning. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. Herman Tate gripped the bench in front of him. Marcus didn't answer. 1 second. 2. 3. Ostrander leaned forward. "Mr. Whitfield, answer the question." He cleared his throat. That was a routine administrative correction. A clerical adjustment to the boundary description. Nothing more. But his voice had changed just a fraction. Just enough. And in the back row, the woman in the charcoal blazer leaned even further forward. Terrence didn't flinch. "A clerical adjustment to a document you just told this court was authentic and complete as originally filed." He turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit C, the court's own electronic filing log, showing an amended deed submitted by Mr. Whitfield at 4:50 this morning. I also have a side-by-side comparison of the original and amended versions. He laid both documents on the table carefully, the way his grandmother once laid out lesson plans on wood, just like it. The amendment changes the boundary description to match a new survey Adler Point Developments commissioned last month. The original deed references boundary lines that don't match current county records at all. He looked at Ostrander. If the original deed were genuine, Your Honor, it wouldn't need correcting. Un réel document. Signed by a real person. Notarized by a real notary. Would already match the records as they stood in 2023. His voice didn't rise. Didn't waver. Didn't perform. Mr. Whitfield amended this deed at 4:50 this morning because he already knew the original wouldn't survive today. He didn't expect anyone to check the notary registry. He didn't expect anyone to compare the boundary language. He paused. He didn't expect us. The courtroom was so still you could hear the fluorescent light buzzing in the corner. Marcus shot to his feet, face going red from the collar up. This is outrageous. I will not be cross-examined by a child. Your Honor, I demand. Ostrander's voice cut across the room like a blade. You will address this court with respect. Mr. Whitfield, and you will answer the question I have now asked you twice. Why was the deed amended this morning? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. 28 years of courtroom instincts. And he couldn't find a single word. In the back row, the woman in the charcoal blazer sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, but if you looked closely, you'd have seen her nodding. One question. That's all it took. One question from an 18-year-old in a pressed shirt, standing in a room that had laughed at him before he'd even opened his mouth. If this gave you chills, hit that like button right now. And send this to someone who's been told they don't belong in the room. Judge Ostrander didn't speak right away. She studied the deed. Then the amendment. Then the notary printout. Then the medical record, 4 documents laid out like puzzle pieces already solved. The courtroom waited. Marcus sat with both palms flat on the table. His associate silent. One of them quietly clicking his briefcase shut, the kind of small, unconscious gesture that tells you exactly what a man believes is coming. Ostrander put her glasses back on. Wrote something in her notepad. Then looked up. I've heard enough. She folded her hands. This court finds that the deed transfer presented by Adler Point Developments is invalid on multiple, independent grounds. Her voice was steady. Measured the voice of someone who had delivered hundreds of rulings, but understood this one carried more weight than most. First, the signature on the deed does not correspond to the known physical capabilities of Mrs. Cantat, Odessa Bellamy, who has been unable to use her left hand since the winter of 2018. The deed is dated 2023. Second, the notarization was performed by an individual whose commission had been revoked more than a year and a half prior to the date on the document, rendering it void under state law on that basis alone. Third, the plaintiff's own 11th hour amendment to the deed, filed less than 6 hours before this hearing, fatally undermines any claim to its authenticity. A genuine document does not require correction on the very morning it's set to be examined by this court. She looked directly at Marcus. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Odessa Bellamy retains full, undisputed ownership of the property at Fenwick Hollow. She paused, the fan turning once, twice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation into potential fraud, fabrication of evidence, and professional misconduct on the part of counsel for the plaintiff. The gavel came down. One sound, sharp and final, echoing off the low ceiling. The old wood paneling, the flickering fluorescent light, landing somewhere deep in the chest of everyone in that room. For a full second, nobody moved. Then Herman Tate stood slowly, the way a 69-year-old man with bad knees stands when something matters enough to hurt for. He brought his hands together. One clap, then another. The woman beside him rose. Then the man behind her. until the whole second row was on its feet. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a movie moment. It was maybe a dozen people clapping in a small courthouse in a small town. But it sounded like the whole world had finally decided to pay attention. Odessa Bellamy sat in her wheelchair with tears running down her face. Her right hand pressed to her chest. Terrence knelt beside her. Simone knelt on the other side. Nobody said anything. They just held her, 3 people. 1 wheelchair. 66 years of land beneath their feet. And a lifetime of being told none of it was really theirs. Marcus Whitfield packed his briefcase without looking at the judge. The gallery. The twins. Or the old woman in the wheelchair. He walked out through the side door. His 2 associates trailing behind him. Heads down. The door clicked shut. In the hallway, he passed Herman Tate standing by the water fountain. Herman didn't say a word, just looked at him with almost 40 years of Fenwick Hollow behind his eyes. Marcus kept walking. That was enough. The woman in the charcoal blazer waited until the room had mostly emptied. Then stood, straightened her jacket, and walked over to the defense table. "My name is Renata Cho," she said. "I direct the Midwest Regional Office of a national civil rights legal foundation." Terrence and Simone looked up at her. Odessa looked up too. "I came here today to observe a completely different case on the docket. But I watched everything that just happened in this room." She looked from Terrence to Simone. "I've supervised third-year law students who couldn't do what the 2 of you just did in front of that judge." She set a business card on the table. "I'd like to talk to both of you about a full scholarship. Law school. Both of you. If you're interested." Simone looked at Terrence. Terrence looked at his grandmother. Odessa smiled. The kind of smile that starts slow and takes over a whole face and finally breaks a woman's composure completely. "Go on," Odessa said. "Answer the lady." Terrence picked up the card. His hands had finally stopped shaking. 6 months later, Terrence and Simone Bellamy started their first semester in a pre-law program at a state university, 2 hours from Ashford Mills. Full scholarships. Both of them. Arranged by a single phone call from Renata Chow. Terrence still carries the canvas notebook. Both notebooks. Actually, pages full now. Though he bought a third, the week classes began. Same size. Same style. The clerk at the campus bookstore asked if he was a writer. "No. Ma'am," he told her, "I just like to be ready." Simone declared a double concentration in constitutional law and civil rights litigation. Her advisor told her that was ambitious for a first-year student. She told him she'd already won a case. He didn't bring it up again. Back at Fenwick Hollow, the slate-blue farmhouse is still standing. The porch swing still creaks. Odessa still sits there every morning. Coffee in her right hand. Watching the hickory trees do what they've done for 60 years grow. 3 other black families still on Fenwick Hollow reached out to Terrence after the hearing, wanting him to look over their own deeds. He did. 2 of them carried the exact same notary stamp, Roland Voss. Same revoked commission. Same lie repeated. Those cases are pending now. Herman Tate told his wife about it over dinner one night. She asked if he thought things were finally changing in Ashford Mills. He thought about it a long time before he answered. 40 years I've lived on that hill, he said. First time in my life I believe somebody's actually watching out for us. Marcus Whitfield remains under investigation by the State Bar. Adler Point Developments quietly withdrew every pending land claim tied to Fenwick Hollow. Preston Adler hasn't set foot in the Ashford County Courthouse since. Nobody in town talks about Marcus Whitfield the way they used to. Terrence Bellamy didn't have a law degree. He didn't have a suit that fit right. He didn't have money, connections, or 28 years of experience. What he had was a grandmother who taught him to read, a sister who taught him how to fight, and one question nobody in that courtroom ever saw coming. I picked this story because I'm tired of watching people get sized up and dismissed before they've even opened their mouths. Terrence and Simone walked into that room with nothing but preparation and nerve, 18 years old. No degree, no backup, and still made a grown man forget how to speak. If this story hit you the way it hit me, here's what I need from you. First, hit subscribe. Stories like this deserve an audience. And this channel exists because people like you keep showing up. Second, send this to somebody who's ever been counted out, laughed at, told they don't belong in the room. Third, drop a comment and tell me the truth if you were 18. No lawyer, no money, and your grandmother's home on the line. Would you have had the nerve to ask that one question? And if you think you caught every detail, watch it again. There's something in the first 2 minutes you probably missed. I promise you that.